morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rutendo Nyaku. I will be with you for the next few minutes to discuss with you my presentation and my research on the Free Movement of Persons Protocol and trying to bridge the gap between tourism and conservation in Africa as a means to unlock Africa's natural wealth. Where I can say we can start is why the African Continental Free Trade Area. We have over 1.3 billion people on the continent, and that serves as a market, a potentially lucrative market that can unify people and have the potential of at least $4 trillion in GDP. And currently, this is not being leveraged, and yet there are efforts underway through the African Continental Free Trade Area itself as a trade agreement. But one of the protocols coming out of this is the free movement of persons and the realization that if people are moving freely across borders, then they have the opportunity to learn about other environments, to do business in other environments, and obviously unlock the $4 trillion that potentially could be. So the research has also shown that there are many barriers and opportunities, of course, for this free movement protocol. One of the issues that has been coming up a lot in the interviews is the fact that there is movement discrimination in Africa amongst Africans. So a Ghanaian trying to move to Rwanda is met with quite a lot of suspicion. There's the logistical costs involved with moving, for example, from Kenya to Ethiopia and then perhaps to Sierra Leone. So the pricing models and packaging are, of course, created for an external market. And so they're not really something that's as attractive to the African consumer. And then there's also the issue that conservation is very top down. So these are the barriers. But these barriers are also opportunities. For instance, the movement discrimination. One of the people that I interviewed made a note that where movement discrimination is concerned, this can be tackled in a lot of ways. For a consumer to know and understand that my tourism package allows me to buy a plane ticket, a visa, a whatnot, controllable factors, seamlessly all the way up until the ground transfer. And so this permits the tourist to not necessarily have to think about the nitty-gritty. Of course, once they arrive at the border post, that's a completely different ballgame. And this is where the lobbying might have to be a bit stronger. In terms of logistical costs themselves, the greater number of people trying to move across borders, of course, may mean that the logistical costs may reduce. But this is where partnership between the tourism sector and, the different modes of transport, the sectors for different modes of transport will be very, very critical. The kinds of partnerships and relationships would be necessary to somewhat bring down the logistical costs of traveling from one place to the other. And so these partnerships have not necessarily been explored for different reasons or the other, but what the experts who I interviewed spoke about was the fact that the possibilities are there. So some barriers that are in our control are, packaging the low seasons for the African consumer. Naturally, at least we would have the high seasons bringing in a lot of forex, but the low seasons would be packaged for the African consumer in such a way that they're able to travel from point A to point B and enjoy the benefits. And so if we were to leverage the external consumer, the outside of Africa consumer, and bring in as much forex, we would at least be able to somewhat repackage the products for the African consumer. But in all of this, it obviously would mean that repackaging for the African consumer would have to have logistics in mind. More than anything else, the free movement protocol, right, or at least the free movement of persons, is a logistical issue. And rethinking about tourism in Africa in a logistical way is one of the ways that, I've discovered in these interviews as being necessary. I would say also the programs focusing on the intersection of the Guided Trade Initiative and the Free Movement Protocol. Like I said, Rwanda has been quite a star child in showing and leveraging what it looks like for its people to be able to move around the continent much more freely, but also to start trading much more freely. So I think we can actually start to take advantage of the countries that are trading under the Guided Trade Initiative and offering packages to those countries, because the customs barriers and things are underway and being reduced slowly. So at least 9 countries are already benefiting from just free trade alone, and the potential for them to benefit from free movement is increasing. So, how do we bridge the gap? We bridge the gap through the re-education of free movement. One of the problems with free movement is that there's a lack of an understanding amongst policymakers of seeing the financial potential of easier movement. And this is where the tourism, hospitality, and wildlife economies really need to play a role. It's not just about doing the business of the day, but now it's about taking a very strong advocacy approach to re-educate what free movement looks like in financial terms. We also want to leverage the African middle class because it is a big question mark, and in terms of how do we package for that specific consumer? Because we're seeing the African middle class is very active in going to Europe, for instance, but not very active in Africa. But this can actually be turned around. And the reason being that it seems the research shows that the African middle class continues to go to Europe, not just because it's easier and cheaper to go there, but also because the packaging of going there seems more attractive. There are different types of offers for different kinds of consumers. And if we could bring that same approach, we could actually increase the number of African middle class who are willing to travel within Africa. And by facilitating that, we'll be able to at least also, in an indirect way, re-educate free movement for policymakers. The last thing that has come out is the storytelling and accessibility of the free movement. The storytelling and packaging of free movement has been so poor. And the research shows that because of this lack of awareness of what it means in financial terms, what it means for the day-to-day person, it's not attractive, not just to policymakers, it's also not attractive to the ordinary person. So we need to think about our storytelling. We need to think about the narrative that we're using towards free movement, the kinds of language that we're using. And doing that is going to be very, very critical. And how do we do that? We really need to look at free movement as a marketing tool. What would it look like as a marketing strategy? For more information on my research and paper, please go to the Brenthurst Foundation website, where you'll find a lot more detail on my research. But thank you so much for making the time. And I hope we'll be able to see each other again in another colloquium. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you to everyone who's taking the time to listen.